Good evening. I almost said good morning. I'm used to doing these in the morning. Um, Hello, everyone. I don't know if anyone's here. If you're here, leave a comment in the comments. If you're not here, I guess I'm just going to talk a little bit about show versus tell. Someone here. Oh, yay, there are people here. That makes me happy. I am not used to doing this live stream thing yet. I'm getting there though. So hello. I thought we would do a little live stream tonight about show versus tell and how it relates to your writing. Hey, Teresa. So let's wait a few minutes and see if some more people come. There's some more people. Hi, guys. Welcome. If you have questions about show versus tell, it'd be awesome if you shared them in the chat so I could answer them. Hi, everyone. Hello. Say hello in the comments so I know you're here in the chat. So that I know you're here, that would be awesome and very helpful. Hi. Hello. Don't be shy, guys. Hello. Okay, so I guess we'll just start talking and hopefully you will be inspired to interact with me so I'm not talking to myself. Show versus tell. I think a lot of times people think show versus tell is something that's only for fiction writers. I think it definitely is for fiction writers. It's an important part of fiction writing. Like maybe the only part of fiction writing, or the most important part, not the only part, the most important part. But it matters for nonfiction, blogging, pretty much every kind of writing. Teresa says, can a writer get too showy? The answer to that is yes, they can. It's more of a problem to have too much tell, but you can also have too much show. Let's start by talking about what showing and telling are, and then I'll tell you, I'll give Teresa a more in-depth answer. So the for me, the best way to show the difference, describe the difference between telling and showing is that telling is like if Teresa and I sat down to coffee tomorrow morning and I told her all about this great party that I went to the night before. I gave her all the details and I told her who was there and I told her what I did and who I talked to and who I danced with and all the stuff, all the details, right? All the juicy stuff. If that's happening the next day over coffee, I'm telling Teresa about it. If I stopped by Teresa's house on my way to my party and I'm like, Teresa, put on your dancing shoes. We're going to a party tonight. And she gets in my car with me and we go to the party together. Then we dance and we drink and we flirt with boys and we do all the party stuff. That's showing, right? I am showing Teresa the party that I was in, that I was headed to. So telling is after it's over, showing is as it's happening. One way that you can tell if something is showing or telling is showing nearly always involves dialogue or internal monologue. There's going to be thoughts in the moment as things are happening, or there's going to be people talking to each other. So if you see dialogue, you're almost always going to be in a scene, and a scene is showing. Hi, Pat. I'm glad you're here too. I don't know why YouTube isn't notifying you. That's really weird. Okay, so showing is, as just I'm saying that showing is you know, showing up in the moment, telling it and being there, and telling is telling about it after it happened. Telling is exposition, it's narrative, and showing is scene, where there is likely some kind of dialogue or monologue, internal monologue. Teresa asked, can a writer be too showy? And the answer to that question is yes. There can be places where you have gone into scene where it's not necessary. Some places where that might happen is like a cat. Yes, it's just like a lens. Kind of like a lens. But in all, although I will say that sometimes telling gets kind of embedded into a scene. So if I write a scene where Teresa and I are sitting down at coffee and I'm telling her about my story, there's going to be dialogue, but it's still telling, right? So telling can be a little bit sneaky, that exposition. It can be sneaky. Just because it's a scene where I'm telling somebody doesn't mean it's not a scene anymore, or it's not telling anymore. Sometimes when you might have, you know, want to have, so there are times when you're going to want to have telling. If it's something that the reader needs to know, but it's not so important that they need to see it, you know, then you can just tell. So you might, and that sometimes happens when you need to show, say, time passing. So if you were writing a scene, like you were getting ready to write a scene of something that happened after work, but the last scene you wrote was in the morning, you know, you don't necessarily need to write the entire work day. You can just say, you know, like have a, you know, end one chapter with the morning, whatever scene that was in the morning, and then start the next chapter with after work, Mary, you know, whatever it is that Mary's going to do. So you can just say, you know, or you can even say something like work was hard, or work seemed like it lasted 100 years, or whatever. Without, you know, we probably don't need to see that whole work scene if the work scene is not something that moves the story forward, except in time. So there's that. You can also, sometimes what happens if you have action scene after action scene after action scene is it's exhausting for the reader. It would be like watching an action movie and all it was one ginormous car chase. It would just be like, sometimes you need some moments to rest, and short passages of exposition are places where the reader gets to rest for a minute before the next action scene. You also, let's say you were writing a story about like someone who I don't know, does something repetitive. In the book Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, Rennie Brown and Dave King use the example of a marathon runner. So if you're writing about a marathon runner, you might show one of their training sessions, but you know, you're not going to spend the whole book writing every single time they go for a run, every single detail of that run, because that would be boring, and you don't want to be boring. So you can be too showy. You don't want, you know, you can also run the risk if you show like more than you need to, you run the risk of the writer or the reader, I'm sorry, not being able to tell what's important, right? Because when you show something, when you go into a scene, you're indicating to the reader that it's important. So if you say, wrote that whole party scene, but we never come back to anything that happened at the party, the reader is going to be like, what happened? Like, why did that happen? So a lot of it is a lot of writing is developing the ability to decide which scenes matter to your story, which scenes move your story forward. I always think every scene that you write needs to do at least two things. It needs to move the story forward. And one more thing. So everything should move the story forward. Everything in your story, exposition or scene, should move your story forward. If it doesn't, if you could take, like, there shouldn't be any scenes or passages in your story where if you took it completely out, it wouldn't impact the story at all. If that happens, and in particular, if your story, your book is running too long, and you have too many words, you need to consider taking that scene out. It might be what we sometimes call a darling, something you love. It might even be beautifully well written. And if it doesn't matter to your story, it doesn't belong in your book, probably. I hope all that makes sense. So it should, your every scene you write and every passage of exposition you write, which that makes up your whole book, scenes and exposition, should move your story forward and do one other thing at least. So move your story forward and either build character, setting development, or story development, plot development. If it doesn't, you need to consider expanding it. Maybe what can you add to it that would make it more more interesting, or deepen your story. What can you add to it that would deepen your story? So what can you add to that I don't know, scene of like that exposition, that coffee table, where we're sitting at the table and I'm just, or just where you tell the reader, Teresa went to a party yesterday and she danced with 3 people and she ate some nachos and she, these are all the things she did. And okay, so one thing you can do is turn that into a scene. Write the party rather than write about the party. And once you've done that, you need to ask yourself, okay, well, what does it do for the story that Teresa went to this party? It moves the story forward because time has passed, but does it do anything else? Does anything consequential happen? Does she have a conversation that matters? Does she meet someone that matters? Do we get a better sense of the place or that she is the story's happening in? And if none of those things are happening, if we don't get to know Teresa better, if we don't get to see how she interacts with other people and how that's going to matter at some point later in the story, then you need to make a choice. You either probably need to consider cutting it, or you need to ask yourself, how could I make this scene bigger? Could I introduce a new character? Could I give the character something to do that would add something to the story? Who else has questions? There aren't very many people here live, so hopefully people watch the live stream. So now is the time to ask questions. What about you, Pat? Do you have any questions about show versus tell? Where do you feel like it sticks you up? Do you ever feel like the show versus tell thing just catches you up? Or do you ever find yourself not being sure if you have even shown or told? I know for a lot of people, especially if they're newer writers, this is part of the struggle, is just knowing even what show versus tell even means, or being able to tell whether you're showing or telling. Molly says I struggle with telling too much around speech. So can you give me an example? Maybe you can cut and paste like a paragraph into the chat if you want. Teresa says, I love show. I might botch up tell though. So you think you're like, when you're telling, it doesn't come out right, Teresa? Like, can you talk more about botching up tell? And Patricia says, I've been struggling with making my characters feel real and not just tell about them. Yeah, part of that has to do with figuring out or learning how to shift from, hi, I'm Pat Davis, and I'm going to tell you the story about Joe and David, right? To, hi, I'm Joe, and I'm going to tell you my story. And making that shift is not easy, especially when you're writing your first book. But when you do, it makes a huge difference in your writing. Does that make sense, Pat? It's like just being in Joe's skin when you're in your story, when you're writing your story, so that like that scene that of yours in your book where Joe and David are walking with their mothers home from work. I think it's early in your book. Rather than being Pat watching them and telling us what's going on, if we're Joe, and if you can get into Joe's skin, and now we're like a young woman in 1940 whatever, and this man that we know how our parents feel about him, and but he's he's been your tutor, and he's so handsome, and he loves you, and you love him, and you've got the secret, and right now you're right, your mothers are right in front of you, they're not paying attention, and how does that feel, right? How does that feel to Joe? So that it's not, not only do we know that she's walking behind her mom next to David, but we also know how, or we feel, right? It's not enough even to know, we have to feel what it feels like to be Joe in that moment. And you do that by getting real close into her point of view, and then showing us the story. Let's see. Sherry says, hi Sherry. I'm sometimes not always sure whether I'm telling or showing. Yep, that's really common. I was saying earlier, I'm not sure if you were here, but one way to tell is if there's any dialogue or inner monologue. Are you sharing the character's thoughts as the scene is happening, or is there some dialogue going on? That's a good indication that you are in the moment and you're writing a scene versus writing exposition or showing instead of telling. Another way you can tell is if, it's hard because I want to say, has this already happened? Or like, is it something that's being remembered because it already happened, or is it happening now? But of course, if you're writing in past tense, then everything has happened in the past. So then it's more like, is this something that happened in the past? It's the moment of your story, or is it something that happened in the past, right? So even in the past, there's a moment that's the moment that your story is taking place. And is it something that happened then, or is it something that happened like past, if that makes sense? Like if I'm telling you a story about something that happened yesterday, but I'm telling it like a book, right? I'm writing a story, a novel about something that happened last week, and then in that moment I am in last week, and you're going to see scenes as if they're happening now, even though they're written in past tense, which is I guess part of why English language is complicated. So it's in the moment that the character is thinking about or telling this story, you want to think about is the part of the story that you're telling something that's happening then, or is it something that happened in the past of that past, if that makes sense? I hope that does. I know that sounds complicated. Let's see. Molly says, I use descriptive speech markers a lot rather than showing my character. Oh, okay. So you're talking about adverbs, I bet. Like, she said softly or slowly, or he yelled or whatever, or he was angry, telling us how they feel. Is that what you mean, Molly? Because if that's what you mean, I have a very good resource for you. It is Chuck Wendig's story, our article called thought verbs. I wonder if I can get it. I'm still here. I think I might have made myself disappear. It's not Chuck Wendig, it's Chuck Palahniuk. But he has this. I'm going to get the link for you guys, even though it means I hope I'm still here and you can still hear me. Come on, baby, open up. All right, here's the link. Yeah. Okay, here's this link. If you go read that article, it will tell you all about everything you ever wanted to know about thought verbs. It's one of the best articles about writing that I've ever read. And so what Molly's talking about is using adverbs or thought verbs, such as feeling, like a verb that describes, or a word that describes a feeling. They're not actually verbs. They're adjectives, but I don't know. Chuck Palahniuk calls them all thought verbs. So thought verbs and feeling words. Let's go with that. And if so rather than saying like he was angry, a couple things usually are happening there. One, it might be that it's clear that he's angry and you don't need to tell us, right? That you have told us just because, you know, you're writing in the moment and it's what feels right to your brain as you're writing. But that when you go back to revise, you can see, oh, I don't need to tell anybody that they're angry here. This character is angry because it's really clear the words that they're using. Sorry. And the way they're behaving, right? So if it's obvious that they're angry, or if there's no other way that they could possibly be feeling in that moment, you don't need to say they're angry. You have both shown and told. So you've shown something and then told it, or you've told something and then gone on to show it beautifully. You could take out the tell. That would be a tell that's just a word or two or a sentence, not like a whole scene or anything. You can also like the other thing you could do is that you've used that verb because it's not, or that adjective or verb because it's not clear. So you're saying he was angry because it's not obvious that he was. Hi, Terry. I'm very glad you're here. Because it's not obvious that he was angry. And if it's not obvious that he was angry without you telling, then the dialogue or the descriptive words that you've used are not doing their job. You haven't done them well enough, to be totally honest. Which is tough to hear. But like, if you either you've done your job well enough and you don't need the thought verb, or you haven't done your job well enough and you need to go back in, and the thought verb isn't strong enough anyway. So what you need to do is go in and make it obvious that, you know, how that character is feeling from the dialogue and the description and their behavior, so that you don't have to use the word angry. I actually I have a list of my own personal like words that I'm sorry, that I need to look for in my that was weird, that I need to look for in my writing, you know, when I get ready to start editing or revising my own stories. And one of my words is the word feel. I use it too much, right? I can feel this, or I feel or felt, depending if I'm writing in first or third or present or past, I mean, tense. So felt or feel. So I felt angry. I felt my heart race. I felt whatever. Like if you've written, I felt my heart race. It's stronger to just say my heart raced, right? So you don't need to have the word feel or felt almost ever. And so I have to go in and take out dozens now, but when I was a newer writer, sometimes it was like hundreds, thousands, I don't know, lots and lots and lots of instances of the word felt. Could I look for I'm sorry. This is what happens when I do something at 8 o'clock at night right after dinner. Anyway, this is I look for words that indicate feeling. So happy, sad, angry, bored, any words like that that I think I might have used. I search through my whole document for them, and I do my best to take them out. And most of the time I can. A lot of telling often happens, as Molly said, in dialogue, in attributions. I search through my whole document for quotation marks. And as I'm doing my revision, this is in the early stages of revising for me, and I look for my dialogue tags. How am I letting the reader know who's speaking? And I take out nearly every one of them, because most of the time you don't need them. Most of the time a beat would be better. And here we go, is the difference between show versus tell, even in a very like minute way, right? A very small word level way. Because if I write, thank you, she said, I'm telling you that she said that, right? If I say, Molly leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms over her chest, thank you. In quotations, the words thank you. Now I've shown Molly, being grateful or being sarcastic or whatever tone she might be saying the word thank you. And I know to me, she's right now, she's not being sarcastic, but if she was in a novel and was the character, there's all kinds of things that the words thank you might mean. And you shouldn't have to tell it, right? You should be able, your reader should be able to know from the context what it is that they are, what the tone is, or the feeling behind the words. And so when you give us the word instead, the feeling, instead of letting us just feel it with them, part of what's going on is that you don't trust that the reader is going to understand, or that you haven't done a good enough job. Right. She seems defensive if she sits back and crosses her arms. If she slumps in relief, right? If she slumps and lets out a big breath that she's been holding and then says thank you, now she's, it's a totally different thing. A totally different way of feeling it. If she bounces on her toes and claps her hands together, it's thank you, that's something else and totally different again. So there's all, with the behavior, you can really show. I'm sorry, of course, when I'm on a live stream, there's someone in here bothering me. Sorry about that, guys. I lost my train of thought. Anyway, I hope all of that makes sense. Any other questions about show versus tell? What about you, Terry? I feel like Terry does a very good job with show versus tell. Is it something that you like? Do you have some sort of trick for it, or is it something you have to think about a lot, Terry? Oh, Teresa, if you're still here, don't forget you wanted to go to Deborah's class, and it's starting in 2 minutes. Anyone who wants to who's in the guild and wants to go to the genre class, it's starting in 2 minutes. It's in the link to that is in your calendar on Teachable. Oh, Terry says she uses a trick I just said. So is that looking for dialogue? What is the big, and Patricia says, or Pat Davis says, what is the big indication that you are really telling when you think you are showing? The biggest one I know is if there's dialogue. That's the biggest one. If there's dialogue and actual quotation marks, then you probably are at least somewhat like at least adjacent to showing, right? You're getting close to it. Sometimes you can have, like I said, you can have dialogue and be in a scene and still have telling. And then sometimes, like, so that would be like if, you know, David is telling Joe something that you could have written the scene. Sometimes you will be in the middle of a scene and then just like part of it, you'll just say it happened instead of actually just showing us it happening. I don't know if there's any big indication other than that I know of, other than dialogue. But like if you find yourself like where you have where as you're reading there's a part where you're like like I was reading one of my students something from them about a week ago, and in it the main character a couple of times was like would like there would be this sentence where they were telling like the author in the exposition was telling something that had happened like 2 minutes before. um you know you they fought, like she would just say they had a fight. Well, okay. But if they had a fight, like, and it just happened and we're right here in the scene, like why not put, it would be really nice to actually see that fight happen, right? So is it are you telling us that something happened when it would be as easy, or just better writing, better experience for the reader to show it? And if you're not sure whether it would be better or not, just ask yourself. This is when I was learning. I don't have to do this anymore. So I hope you will take heart from the fact that it does get easier. It does, I promise. But when I was first learning how to write fiction, and so it took me a lot to understand the difference between show versus tell. I am very aware that this is not easy and it's not always super intuitive. But so when I was first reading, what I would do, hold on, Sherry, and I'll answer your question. Sherry wants to know if we're talking about showing and then telling. Sometimes it's like you're in the middle of showing and then you'll just tell something else that would be better if we could just see it. If it was just a show. But what I would do is I would go through my book chapter by chapter. It took me a long time to edit my first novel. It was very, very bad, very, very bad. I wrote it during NaNoWriMo, so it was rushed. But I had never written a novel before, and I was just beside myself with joy that I had written this novel. And I took a whole year to edit it. I worked at it day after day after day. And one of the things I did was go through it chapter by chapter, page by page, and I highlighted the parts that were scene one color and the parts that were narrative another color. And that forced me to really look at my story and try to tell which parts were narrative, because it's not always, when you're first learning, once you get it, like once it becomes habit, then or you really like nail down what the difference is, then you just see it and it's fine. But until then, it can be difficult. So I highlighted every this was on a paper copy because this was in 2004, and anyway, I printed out, I sent it to Staples because I didn't have a printer, and I paid to have my novel printed. And then I took 2 colors of highlighters and I highlighted the whole entire thing. And because I wanted to see the ratio, right? Because I knew I needed some telling and I knew I needed more showing than telling. And I needed to know where those scenes were. I needed to go and be able to see, or where those telling parts were, and so that I could go back and look at each one and not have to try to decide. Um, so I could look at them objectively. And then I looked at each one and I asked myself, is there any reason why I have told this bit here rather than shown it? Is there some reason why I said that she was angry instead of um, uh, showing what her anger looks like? Have I already shown what her anger looks like? Can I just remove this altogether? Um, do I have a place where I am, you know, telling telling the reader that a conversation happened or an interaction with another character happened when I could have just written that scene and let them see it happen, right? And let them be there when it was happening. Um, and it's hard. Chuck Palahniuk, in that article I linked to, says that for the next 6 months you're going to hate him, and then you're going to love him, because it makes, once you get this, it makes your writing so much better. But in the meantime, you're going to have to go in. It's harder. It's harder to show than tell. It's much easier to write he was angry than to make sure the reader knows what him being angry looks like, and to make them feel it so much that you don't ever have to use the word. That's harder, but it's better. It's better writing. Pat says, I find that I have a scene where something happens, but then in another scene, the character relates a portion of what happened to another character in dialogue. How would you avoid that? Well, the first thing I would do is I would ask myself if it's necessary for the reader to like to like, could you just skip it, right? And will the reader assume that the character gave the information to the other character without you putting it into the dialogue? So let's say Joe and David had like, I don't know, like, let's say that let me think. So Joe and her dad have a fight, right? And it's about David. And then later there's a scene with Joe and David. And do you need to start so far back that Joe is telling David about the fight, or can you just start in the moment of David saying, I don't understand why we can't just get married and not worry about what your dad has to say anymore? So if you started with that line of dialogue, I don't understand why we can't just get married and not worry about your dad anymore. There. Oh my God, I guessed what it was. um, I'm good. I'm just saying. So David needs to know about it, but what you could do is start with a scene where David already knows about it, and then I'm going to assume that Joe told him. So you don't need to show Joe telling David. If David talks to her, so if David's first line of dialogue is, your dad can kiss my butt or whatever, he's not going to say that, but if it's something like that that shows us that David has already heard about the fight, then we don't ever need to know. We'll assume that somewhere off the page Joe told David. Does that make sense? So the reason why you might not do that, so that would be just if David needs to know, and the only reason you were going to have that conversation was for Joe to tell David. But there could be a point where let me see how to say this. Man, I'm yawning and I don't know why. Okay, let's say that Joe needs to like process the fight with her dad, and we get if David if Joe, you're going to write the scene where Joe tells David about a fight that already happened, that we already saw as the readers, that you wrote the scene of the fight or the confrontation with her dad. You need to tell yourself, I only need to write this if so her dad tells her that David will lose his citizenship. I'm assuming like if he goes to Canada or something like that. And so if we can get a different conversation right? Other than, well, I talked to my dad and he said this. If she says, David, are you going to lose your citizenship if you go to Canada? And he's like, where did you hear that? And she can just say, well, my dad said so. And then they can have the conversation can move beyond there to, David's already done some research, or, he's wrong or whatever. Where David tells, Joe that her father is wrong. And then the conversation, right? I could see where this conversation could really move the story forward if we can see or do some character development, if we can see Joe being uncomfortable with even this man who she wants to marry, saying that her father's wrong, or she's confronted. Because now what we can really see is that Joe has trouble contradicting her father, or with anybody contradicting her father. And that's going to be a big part of your story, where that she's going to have to overcome. So you could do that without having on the page Joe tell David every single bit of the conversation that she had with her dad. You could have her just tell him on the scene, on the page, the parts that, are going to make the rest of the conversation make sense. Just enough so that the reader's not lost when they get into what happens next. But if David knows something about what Joe's confrontation with her dad, as a reader, I'm going to assume that Joe told David, even if it's not on the page. I don't need to be told that it happened, because I will assume, and any reader, I think, would assume. I hope that makes sense. Oh, good. Yay. Pat says she has a good idea for fixing that scene. Yeah, just remember, everything needs to move the story forward and do one other thing. So, in this case, I imagine that it will be a lot of some character development, because I feel like this is a really good opportunity for the reader to get a better look at how Joe interacts with her father. Or how she feels about her father, right? And if Joe, like, how is Joe feeling in this moment, right? So if I feel Joe's, maybe she's real frustrated, maybe she's conflicted, maybe she's a little scared, because she's young and she's never gone against her father, and she's never seen her mother go against her father either. So it could be scary to her to contradict him, even not to his face. And so, because what does it mean in her life if her father was wrong in a way that she's never seen him be wrong again or before? So, think about how in that scene are you going to show her feelings? How are you going to let us feel that confliction or fear or anger or frustration? How does she feel? How does David make her feel in his reaction to the conversation with her father? And how are you going to let us feel that, right? How are you going to let us feel that with her? Who else has questions about show versus tell? I want to let you guys know that we are going to have a live class tomorrow in the Ninja Writers Club. It's on Zoom, but the link is in the club. There's also a link that's in the description. If you are not in the club and you'd like to come, you can come. It costs $10. You would own it. If you are in the club and you just want to own that particular class, you're welcome to buy it, but you'll get it. You can attend for free if you're in the club. And you would have access to the recording for a week if you're in the club. There's a link in the chat also to join the club for 2 weeks for free, so you can come to that class. I think I'm very excited. And Pat, if you want to bring that, a page or so with that dialogue that you're talking about, I'm happy to look at it live tomorrow, and we can go over it together. And any of you who are going to come, if you bring a page or so, I'll do my best to get to as many people as possible, and help you with editing. I love doing it. We'll edit a page or so, especially we are going to try to keep it to show versus tell though. So if it's a page where bring it in a Google Doc, but a page where you are not sure how your show versus tell is doing. Okay, are there any last questions? I think we'll wrap this up. This was a lot of fun. You're welcome, Pat. I'll see you tomorrow, I hope. Hope I see all of you tomorrow. Thank you for being here and learning about live edits with me, or live streams with me, and talking about show versus tell. I hope to see you all soon. I would love to see you tomorrow in our class. Have a great day. Bye. A great evening. Bye-bye. You're welcome, Sherry. Bye.